Hi, mamas. Welcome back for session 4 of Conflict and Boundaries. We've got some good things to say following the assignment that you had last week of figuring out where you need to place some boundaries. And I'm going to share a couple of things as we go, as I did the assignment before I handed it to you, and some of the things that I realized.
Good. Today, we're going to talk about the 6 areas of personal boundaries, the types of boundaries that you set, and they come into 6 categories. And I think it will be really helpful as I've given you a lot of background information now about boundaries. And I think it'll help you think about how am I setting boundaries in those certain areas. So that's what we're going to do. The first one is personality and comfort. And I guess one of the statements that I want to make just in general about that is that I want you to try to be gentle with yourself and dignified, and as much as you can be also be firm. You want to not deny or minimize. You want to stop pretending that a behavior is okay unless for some reason you have decided that you're going to ignore that behavior because there is a big reason to ignore it. You know, we've talked a little bit about counting the cost of setting boundaries. Sometimes I think it's valuable to just ignore something if you're not going to be successful setting a boundary around it, as long as it's not something that's hurting you to the point that you can't live with that. So that's kind of the balance in finding comfort. And we've talked a lot about the fact that, you know, boundaries can be not respected by somebody. And so if it's somebody that's peripheral or somebody that you just don't have the ability to control that environment, but you still want that person in your life, or you want them to contribute the way that they contribute in positive ways, then you can choose to ignore that, but you just need to know that's what you're doing. Be clear, honest, and tactfully direct when you do decide that you want to set a boundary on your personality. Trisha gave an example a couple weeks ago about somebody who was trying to set a boundary on her to the point that it was impacting who she was allowed to be. And that's not okay, because that makes us feel like we're who we are is not okay. And one of the things that I love about the culture right now is that we are trying harder. Instead of making little cookie cutters out of everybody, we are trying harder to set boundaries around allowing us to be who we are. You know, there's people who are really flamboyant, and they're really different than people that are really quiet and subdued and wallflower-ish. And those are different than somebody who's very, you know, quick to like go into military mode or whatever. There's just lots of different personalities, which I'm not going to get into all those today. I think we have to be working on ourselves so that we're not overpowering or overdoing or underdoing or whatever. But that's work we do ourselves. Somebody else, unless we've asked them, should not be doing that work with us or for us, unless we've invited them into that, which would be very few people. So that's what I want to distinguish. And then in that too, I think it's important that you distinguish who you are versus what somebody else tells you you are. When somebody tells you who you are and your personality, I think it's okay to go to your quiet place and say, is that true about me? Or is that person wrong? Or have I displayed myself that way, but that's really not who I am? So those are kind of the personality.
Do you set a boundary on the person who like said the negative thing about you?
Well, you can. And again, it's, you know, in every boundary you have to count the cost. And you can say to that person, yeah, I think you've got me wrong. That's not how I am. At least that's not how I perceive myself to be, or that's not how I experience whatever. So it's not such a big boundary, but it's more of kind of defending who you think you are. And you guys are all in your 30s and 40s now, most of you, or 50s. And so you do know who you are, and you do want to give yourself permission to be that person. You know, I'm really verbal, and I got criticized for that as a young person a lot, to the point that I tried really hard. How do I stop being so verbal? Now, on the one hand, that's a good thing because I think I was too verbal. And I did kind of force myself to pull back. And so in a lot of ways that was good, but I was shamed into it. And I didn't like that. God made me really verbal. There's gifts that I have because I am verbal, like being able to speak in public, which a lot of people can't do. And it's just not hard for me. And so you have to always remember to balance the positives of that character trait with the negatives. So as a therapist, I had to learn how to listen better. And I think I've become a pretty good listener. And I don't, overshare like maybe I did when I was in my teens or maybe early 20s.
Is oversharing really a thing?
Well, I mean, I was told it was.
I don't think it is.
So anyway, that's personality and being comfortable with yourself.
One of the things that in our assignment, as we're thinking about setting boundaries, that I realized as I was doing the assignment is that there are a lot of boundaries that need to be set in the moment, and we don't know how. And so we go back and we think about them, and then we miss our opportunity, or it has to become this big thing, this big conflict. And so one of the things that I've been personally working on is called a conversation disruption, where my favorite is to go, So if they say something, I interrupt the conversation with, and it allows both of us to pause. And then for me to say, I didn't like that, or I feel differently. And so just as an example, we are always running late, as you know. And so we walk into church to serve right at 11. Okay, they would prefer us to be there at 10:45. Absolutely no way. If that's the expectation, I'm not doing it. That's my boundary. My boundary is that if you need me to volunteer in kids ministry, I'm not coming 15 minutes early. So take it or leave it. Well, there was somebody who was not the main person in charge, right? So she's already kind of lacking professionalism because it's not her job. And she's holding the door open for kids to come in, and she sees us come and says, "Oh, Weiss family, we were so nervous." Which she's not even in charge. And it really made me mad.
Yeah.
And so I didn't do my conversation obstruction or whatever I just called it. But I wish that I would have said,
Yeah.
that was mean.
Yeah.
Or that was shaming and I don't like that. But the more we practice, the better we're gonna get.
Yeah, right. That's true. So the second category is physical. And I want to talk about this mostly in regard to your children. So obviously you have the right to be safe. They have the right to be safe. No one can force you to do something physically that you don't want to do. And they're never allowed to hit you or damage you. You do not ever bring abuse upon yourself. And you need to know that, and your children need to know that. But there are things that you can do that are helpful to avoid situations like that. And just a simple example would be if somebody is escalating and you are nervous about that, you can leave. That would be something. Don't stick around to find out how far it will escalate. That's just a simple example. So it's still not you. The escalation of somebody else is still not your responsibility. And especially if you were abused in any way as a child, you have no control over that at all, because that adult is responsible for you, and basically they own you, and that you're not going to be successful. So you need to, if you had abuse in your childhood, you need to let yourself off the hook for that. Or if you were forced to do something that was something that you hate, but you were forced to do it anyway, those are the kinds of things that you can't control as a child. With your children, of course, you want them to know that the truth is safe, and so you want them to tell you. But I'm thinking when I'm talking about children, I'm talking about things like when you start sleepovers, or what clothes they wear, or what boundaries you set around clothes they shouldn't wear, or how long they can stay at a friend's house, or how far they can walk, or how far they can ride their bike. Those kinds of things. And I do think when you set boundaries around those physical things with the kids, they really need to understand why that boundary is there. I know Carly has had, her oldest has had boundaries that maybe the 12-year-old Luke didn't have. And some of that's because she's a girl. And unfortunately, there's just truth to that. And you just, he's just much less likely to be abducted or bothered. And he's a little bit heavier, and so he's harder to physically maneuver. And I think a girl needs to know that she has risks that a boy probably doesn't as much have. I was telling Trisha, I'm, concerned about her going into the bathroom in high school next year. And that doesn't mean she doesn't go to the bathroom, but I think you just have the conversation around, what if you go in the bathroom and there's girls in there smoking or whatever the conversation is. When I was in high school, I would go to church every Tuesday and help with Pioneer Girls. And the church secretary asked me once, "Do you smoke?" And no. She goes, "Well, you always smell like smoke." And from that day forward, I never used that bathroom ever again. I didn't know I was picking up the smoke in my hair and clothes and whatever. So then I started going to the nurse when I needed to go to the bathroom and say, "I'm sorry, but I don't want to go in the other bathroom because I smell like smoke when I do." So those are the kinds of things, physically, that I think that you can be paying attention to.
We talked about physical boundaries literally last night, and we were talking about kind of the difference between equity and equality with the three boys, and we were talking about like summer boundaries. And I used this analogy of like a leash, like pretend that you're a dog on a leash, but you're my kid. And little babies don't really have a leash because they're literally connected to mom. And I talked about how as they age, like a 1-year-old, I don't even let out of the room. And then a 2-year-old is at least on the same level as me, et cetera, because I was trying to, because the 8-year-old does not understand that he can't go as far as the 12-year-old. He just literally doesn't understand it.
Yeah.
And then I asked them, I said, "What happens to Carly's leash at 18? And they all were like, "It gets ripped." I was like, "That's right. These are physical boundaries from 0 to 18.
Yeah, right, exactly. That's right. That's really good. Really good.
All right, emotional boundaries.
Yeah, so the next one's emotional. And I think with emotional boundaries, Trisha was talking about that just a little bit, that example she gave when she got to church. Now, this is a person who she's not going to have a lot of interaction with, probably doesn't need to totally be confronted. Like she said, "I kind of wish I'd confronted her." Well, maybe you just smile and chalk up in your head that person's kind of shaming when they're nervous or whatever. I'm talking more about differentiating your emotions from your child's emotions or from your husband's or from your best friend's, and knowing when your emotions are maybe affecting someone else and when somebody else's emotions are affecting you, and being differentiated in that. So if your daughter wakes up in a really bad mood a lot of the time, you can set a boundary around, go have quiet time in your room until you're, ready to be. I don't even know if she has to be kind. She just has to be human. She just has to be willing to not negatively impact the rest of the house. I think that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about emotional boundaries. And then being able to evaluate yourself. Trisha's told me she has some emotional dysregulation, at certain days of the cycle of her period. And so that's great that you know that. You're not always going to be able to control it, but at least you know it, you're aware of it. So that's what I'm talking about when I talk about emotional. And then respecting other people's boundaries. If you're gonna learn to set boundaries, you also have to learn to respect other people's. And if they want to try to draw you into their own emotional dysfunction, you have to be able to be like, "No, you can have a bad day, but I'm not planning to have one today." And then being wise and choosing. In that scenario, I think it was probably good she said nothing, really, honestly. It was just somebody being, having emotionally responding to something that you just can smile and move on and not even feel like you have to confront it. So
next time I'm saying something. I do interact with this lady a lot. She drives me nuts.
No, just the point of emotional boundaries is more know what's yours and know what's not yours. And if you can navigate that, the better you can navigate that, the better your life is going to be. I know early in my marriage, I had to learn that if my husband was in a bad mood, Or vice versa. If I was in a bad mood, it wasn't necessarily because of him and it wasn't necessarily because of me. And it's a good thing to check in on and say, did I do something to offend you? And if they say no, then accept that as the answer, and then they have to deal with themselves and you don't have to deal with it. So that's what I'm really talking about with emotional boundaries.
And we also all have an emotion that we try to avoid. And it's helpful if you know that about yourself too, because then you're less likely to take on someone else's emotion, because you're like, I hate feeling that emotion. But it's important to know what that is.
Right. Along with that is you can have empathy and compassion for somebody who is having an emotional reaction to something without necessarily taking it on, making it yours. Mm-hmm. So that's something we learned when I was in school becoming a therapist. And I remember my supervisor saying to me, he would say, what are you going to do to fix this? And the purpose of that question was to like make us think that we had to do something. And then and so we learned to say, well, it took them 10 years to get into this situation. I don't think I'm going to get them out of it in a week. And that was his point. You know, this is a process. And if you can help them regulate in some way that they in the past haven't been able to do, then you've been successful. But you're not going to get them out from under all of their dysfunction, quickly. That's just not going to happen. And then along with emotional is also just dealing with the fear. And this has a little bit about counting. Has to do with counting the cost. But, your fears of being left alone or thinking that you're a bad person or guilt or hurt or losing someone's approval, those are all things that we deal with, and those are all the costs of setting boundaries, and we have to be willing to do that. I think I might have given you guys the example of I used to call my dad every 6 weeks, and I told him to stop cussing at me, and he said F you and then hung up the phone. And I remember so clearly the emotions of that. At first I was hurt, but I very quickly moved into just being sad. And the sadness was that was how he responded to my boundary. And then he respected the boundary the next several times I talked to him, he didn't cuss at me anymore. So I had to embrace my emotion, but I didn't feel guilt. I fully felt I had the right to say, I don't want to listen to that language anymore. I was subjected to that my whole entire young life. And that's what I mean when I say you can't control that environment. I couldn't have told him when I was 10, stop cussing at me. He probably would have hit me. But I could tell him at 25 or at 30, whatever age I was when I set that boundary. The next one is relational. So I love the verse, Ephesians 4:15, by speaking the truth in a spirit of love, you must grow up in every way to Christ who is the head. That is a mantra for relationships. We've talked a lot about the truth has to be safe, but you want to do it in love. You want to strive to be heard, but you also have to recognize when somebody is not going to hear you. There have been times in my marriage where I've waited a really long time to try to explain something to my husband because I just could tell that he was going on a bunny trail that wasn't what I was trying to say, and I couldn't get him to come back from that bunny trail because of his own processing, his own way of thinking about whatever it was we were talking about. And so I just had to wait because I knew trying to cram it down his throat wasn't working. And that's what I taught. That's that wisdom. By speaking the truth in the spirit of love, you must grow up in every way to Christ who is the head. That, to me, that there was a maturity in that I had to wait until I thought he asked the right questions so that I could really explain to him how whatever it was impacted me. And then the other part of that we've also talked about before is do not be controlled and do not try to control others. And a lot of people think that boundaries is about control. It is not about controlling someone else. I mean, it is to some degree with your children, especially when they're young. But even Trisha's finding out with a 14-year-old, there are boundaries that she doesn't put out there anymore that she would have when she was 10, because she has to find her way in the world. And we have to remember that we own our children until they're about 14, and then we're teaching them to own themselves. We're equipping them. I mean, we equip them the entire 18 years, but there are things that Carly's going to decide that Trisha doesn't necessarily approve of or agree with. and you know, if she's wise, there are times she's not going to confront it, because that's part of developing your own personality, and you can't control that. And I'll give you an example. My youngest daughter has tattoos, and I absolutely hate them. And some of you probably have tattoos. I'm not judging you. I just don't understand it. It's not something that my generation, well, some people in my generation have tattoos, but I don't get it. And, you know, that's okay. I don't have to get it. But I can't judge her for that. That's something that's important to her. I just have to quietly not like it. Well, I mean, she kind of knows we don't like, Ron doesn't like it either. I mean, she knows we don't like it, but we don't judge it. We don't comment on it. We don't try to shame her about it. That's her choice. That's not, her skin is her skin. It's not mine. And she can do whatever she wants. And that's not, you know, something that's worth even a conversation about. Unless I'm trying to understand it, and then I might have a conversation, but I think I'm kind of beyond even trying to understand it. So anyway, that's just kind of an example there.
So I have somebody that's a friend and a business partner, and when we entered business together, I set boundaries and said, this is my expectation, this is what you need to do. She agreed to those boundaries, right? I put her in the position that I did. And now it's been years. I have not necessarily reminded this person about the boundaries, but she's no longer following them, and it is having a strong impact on my income, which has been like really, really hard. And so, like, what do you even do in that situation where you set the boundary and they won't respect it? Where do you even go?
Yeah.
Next.
I think you actually asked them. So one of the things Trisha just said that's important is she did try to set the boundary initially when she first became part of the group. I think Trisha then can say, I don't know if you remember this, but I did tell you XYZ.
Or you agreed to
back when, or
XYZ.
You agreed to XYZ. And if you didn't do that at the beginning, you can still do it. You can still say, I probably didn't make this clear enough back in the beginning, but I do need you to know that because we're in a business relationship, XYZ needs to happen. And I need you to know that, and I need you to agree with it, because this is a business, this is not a personal thing. If she does not respect at that point, I think that you're allowed to say, I don't know what else to do, because this is the way it is, and I need you to respect it, and I am your supervisor, and what do I do now? And I think you ask them, what do I do? And then you figure out what you have to do to escalate that situation, if in fact there's a way to escalate it. So I think you just throw it back on them. I thought this was clear. I'm going to make it clear again, and now I need to know, what do I do? You tell me what to do, because you're either not hearing me or you're not respecting it, and I need you to hear it, and I need you to respect it. This is not negotiable. So that's probably what I would encourage you to do. The last one is financial, and there's actually two. The other one is material, like personal belongings. I'm going to clump them together. Okay, so just as an example, a husband or a wife can really destroy their spouse financially. And I've seen this with people who are in the process of getting divorced. Like, they'll run up a credit card and the credit card's in both of their names. It's really very scary. It can be very scary if you can't trust someone financially, and your finances are blended, and, you know, credit cards and all those kinds of things. And then materially, you know, the same thing can be true with personal belongings, controlling, somebody trying to use personal belongings to control you. And parents are notorious for this with adult children. I will help you financially, but then you have to do XYZ. And
we call that blood money.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. Now, it's tough, because if, as an adult parent, if I'm trying to help my adult child, There probably are some rules that come along with that money. Some may be spoken, some maybe not. And you have to spell that out as best as you can. But if the child is just like I'll give you an example. I know parents who've had wayward adult children who come back and live in the home, maybe in the basement or whatever, for a period of time, and that can be really risky because now you've got that adult child in your home, and they're probably eating your food, and they're probably walking on your clean carpet, and using your address for who knows what. So there has to be rules when that kind of a thing happens. And if they don't respect it, there has to be a boundary, and there has to be a, you know what, we tried this, but it's not working. So, like, even loaning money, you want to be really careful, especially if it's to a friend. You want to be really careful that there's a kind of a contract written. Now, it doesn't have to be a legal contract, but that you have set boundaries around how that's going to go, or when the payment is going to come back, or something, because it can ruin relationships if you're not able to set financial boundaries. So that is why we have contracts. I mean, that is why a bank is allowed to take your house and foreclose upon you if you don't follow the rules of the contract. So I think just the Bible even says, if you're going to give a gift, let it be a gift. If it's going to be a loan, let it be a loan, and differentiate between the two. And that's what I'm talking about when I encourage you. Now, your kids are, relatively young. I mean, I think that she has the oldest, and beyond that, there's probably a kid out there that's 11. So, you can use these boundaries with them a little bit, but when they get a little bit older and you're helping them with college, or you're helping them buy a house, or you're helping them buy a car, you want to be really clear as you can be, what the terms of that agreement are, so that you don't get run over. I know my mother-in-law got into a situation with one of her grandkids, none of mine, but it really damaged the relationship because they had different ideas of what the agreement was, and that's because it wasn't really made clear. And I think that still causes, I mean, this was 10 or 15 years ago, and I think there's still a rift, even though maybe neither one would admit it. I think it permanently damaged the relationship.
It damaged a lot of interpersonal relationships too.
Yeah, I think it did.
It was 17 years ago.
Yeah, I think people had opinions in the family, and I think it made a difference. So anyway, that's what I'm talking about. You material. If you're going to give something to somebody, give it, but don't put strings to it.
So good.
Yeah, don't let material things control you, but also don't let someone else use material things to control a relationship or damage things.
There's a saying going around online right now that says, "Girl, I don't know who traumatized you, but you do not need to pay me back for that $6 coffee." as this way of like we feel so but like, if you're true friends, it's all going to shake out in the end.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I host Meg for dinner all the time. She hosts me I'm not keeping track, right? Because it's a gift, not a loan. And if it needs to be a loan, then I need to be clear. Yeah. And I need to say, we're having you over for dinner. When can you have us? Yeah. Because if it's important to me, then I better say that. And otherwise.
Right. Otherwise, it's a gift. Yeah. Sounds good. All right. Have a wonderful week. And thanks for listening.